After the demise of the first Khalifa radiallahu ta'ala anhu, his will was read out, in which he desired and at the same time instructed that after him an election should take place to elect the next Khalifa. Now, this election was not to be the mere opinion of the men taking part. Rather, it was to be the divine decree of God placed in the hearts of those men. Now, this was proven by the fact that a man no more than 25 years of age was elected to be the next Khalifa. Now, had the decision been left up to men, many would have said that he was too young to take on such a great responsibility and would not have elected him. However, God the Almighty knew that this young man was to render amazing services to the religion of Islam and Ahmadiyyat. Thus, a new era began with the election of the second Khalifa, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to another episode of Ahmadiyyat, Roots to Branches.
I came merely to sow the seed. That seed has been sown by my hands. It will now grow and blossom forth, and none dare impede its growth. Ahmadiyyat, the true Islam, is the flourishing tree. But this is not just any tree. This is the tree, the seed of which was sown under the guidance of Allah Himself, through the hands of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmed of Qadian alayhi salatu wasalam, the promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi. Its miraculous growth in the midst of difficult and seemingly impossible circumstances is indeed a tale that is bound to increase one's faith, as if this is the tree that grew from concrete. Presently, under the guidance and leadership of our beloved Khalifa, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmed, may Allah strengthen his hands, the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat is now present and propagating the peaceful message of Islam in over 200 countries around the world. The Jamaat has built over 15,000 mosques, over 30 hospitals, and over 500 schools. It has translated the Holy Quran into over 70 languages. This is but merely a glimpse at the progress and a fraction of the achievements of Ahmadiyyat in only one single century. But this is Ahmadiyyat at present. Let us now take a step back and witness exactly how Ahmadiyyat, by the sheer grace of Allah, reached this point and attained these heights. For history is not only a means to understand and appreciate the present, but also a means to envision the future. Follow us on this journey.
On today's episode of Roots to Branches, join us as we explore the establishment of the second Khilafat and the foremost events which took place after its establishment. We will then see how flocks of people began pledging allegiance at the hand of the second Khalifa, Hazrat Muslim Maud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, despite the fact that the opponents of Khilafat were spreading a lot of propaganda against Khilafat. And we will also see the end of these opponents of Khilafat and how they were extremely unsuccessful. But first, let us begin by taking a look at the actual election of the second Khilafat and the events which took place within it.
For the appointment of Khalifatul Masih Sani radiyallahu anhu, members of the Jamaat gathered in the Noor Mosque in Qadian. Hazrat Nawab Muhammad Ali Khan Sahib radiyallahu anhu read out the will of Khalifa Awwal radiyallahu anhu, and according to his will, requested that members of the Jamaat present names for the successorship of Khilafat. Upon this announcement, Hazrat Maulvi Sayyid Muhammad Hassan Sahib radiyallahu anhu presented the name of Sahibzada Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Sahib radiyallahu anhu, but we see that you humbly declined, and despite the desire of the masses, rejected this proposal. Now the world was without a Khalifa, and naturally this was a very emotional and passionate environment for the members of the community. So much so that members of the community clenched onto the hands of Sahibzada Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Sahib radiyallahu anhu in order to take your bath. But again, we see that you rejected this. You stated that even if I were to take your oath of allegiance, I do not even know the words for bath. At this moment, Hazrat Maulvi Sayyid Muhammad Sarwar Shah Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu stated that I will say the words for Ba'ath. All you have to do is simply repeat the words after me. Thus, the oath of allegiance was taken at the hands of Sahibzada Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu. And according to the divine ordinance, the world was once again under the shade of Khilafat.
The first address of Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih II radiyallahu anhu on that momentous, historic day of March 14th, 1914, as the Khalifat al-Masih, the son of the promised Messiah ﷺ, as well as the successor of his great friend and teacher, Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih I, Maulvi Nuruddin Sahib radiyallahu anhu, fell like thunder not only upon the populace watching, but as well upon Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih II himself. When he starts off the address, he starts with tashahud, and he starts explaining exactly what he believes. He says that I believe that there is none worthy of worship except Allah. Then he goes on to not only speak about the finality of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but highlights the fact that his finality in fact means his supremacy over all other human beings in existence. Then he says that the evidence that exists to substantiate the truthfulness of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad ﷺ, the promised Messiah ﷺ, is incontrovertible, and that the Holy Quran and the Ahadith Mubarakah, the noble sayings of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, are more than sufficient testament to this. But then he does something very interesting. Huzur radiyallahu anhu, this 25-year-old man addressing the aged, sacred companions of the promised Messiah ﷺ, so many years older than he starts saying, I am so utterly weak and so unworthy. Yet, it is incumbent upon all of you now that you accept and obey everything that I say that is ma'ruf, that is good. And then, after this, almost every other sentence of this address highlights just how weak he is. And he goes on to say that the fact of the matter is that I expect that you will oversee my faults, and I promise and take an oath, divinely so, to do the same. And finally, he said something so interesting, Umar, in this address. Look at the humility of this man. He says that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has specifically instructed that we should never burden even a servant beyond his capacity or give him any task that he can't handle. He says, as such, now I stand before you as your servant. So please, O ye who are the believers who have now done ba'ath at my hands, do not burden this humble soul with anything that he cannot take. And of course, this was the sweetness of the moment, but the mixed emotions were running rampant because after all, their beloved Imam of 6 years and their master and teacher for decades had just passed away.
And following this inspirational and emotional speech of Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih Thani raziyallahu anhu, he prayed, everyone prayed together in silent prayers, and as you just said, that the reality of the situation had dawned upon everyone. And Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih Thani raziyallahu anhu stood in front of his teacher, his master, his mentor, his friend, Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih al-Awwal raziyallahu anhu's body, and led his janazah at about 4:45 p.m. in the grounds of Talim Islam High School in front of some 2,000 men and women. And then he walked with the body to Bahishti Maqbara, the followers, forlorn followers, stretching for miles in the streets of Qadian. Imagine for a second the environment of Qadian at this moment. All these followers who had gathered here in the love of their beloved master who had just passed. And now they were waiting for that new guide, for that new teacher who would take this cause further. And Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih Thani raziyallahu anhu felt this responsibility, overbearing responsibility, dawn upon him even more as each second passed. And as he laid his master, his teacher, Hazrat Khalifat al-Masih al-Awwal raziyallahu anhu, beside on the right side of Hazrat Masih Maud wasalam, we can only imagine what kind of responsibility, what kind of burden he felt at this moment.
Absolutely. You know, the responsibility that he felt, it would crush any man, literally perhaps. You know, psychologically speaking, you think, how can someone not have a nervous breakdown, whereas on one side he showed so much humility, and how is it possible that despite all of this humility and apparent lack of confidence, he held his own and maintained his composure in such a genius fashion? The truth is that when Allah Ta'ala gives a task of such colossal proportions to any one of His chosen servants, He does not just leave him empty-handed. As such, so was the case with Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II radiallahu anhu, and one of the hallmark dreams that Allah Ta'ala reassured him, divinely so, was, he says that I saw that I'm walking upon a mountain, a road upon a mountain, and he says that as I walk along this road, I realize as I see, down the length of it, that it is so tremulous and daunting. And he says, terrified, I try to turn around, but it seems that a wall that seems like a mountain in itself is obstructing my path. And he says, I realize that I have to keep going on this path, so I turn around and keep going. He says that when I awoke, I realized that this was Allah Ta'ala lucidly communicating to this humble one that now there is no turning back, and that I must undertake and fulfill this heavy responsibility.
Now, on March 14th, 1914, the day Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu was elected as the second Khalifa, over 2,000 people pledged allegiance at his hand, including those who had come from outside of Qadian during the last few days of the illness of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Awwal Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu. Now, at the same time, there was a small faction who did not pledge allegiance at the hand of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu. And this was a group known as Munkarin Khilafat, or the opposers of Khilafat. There were not many in number. They only made up about 1 or 2% of the community at the time. However, they had some very prominent and influential people amongst them. And they were very, fervent in spreading their propaganda, the fact that they believed that the Khilafat was not in a single person, rather in the form of an anjuman. Now, this was a cause for concern more for the people living outside of Qadian in different parts of India and Punjab. And the reason for this was that, being distant from the markaz or the center of the community, their knowledge about the religion may not have been as high. Hence, they could easily be swayed by these falsehoods which were being spread about. So, right after the establishment of the second Khilafat, a great deal of attention was given towards this, towards writing articles in various newspapers about the true Khilafat and sending various scholars to different parts of India and Punjab in order to inform people about what the truth was and enable them to distinguish between the truth and the falsehood and, accept the true Khilafat. And at the same time, the Munkarin Khilafat, the opposers of Khilafat, were becoming stronger in their propagation of their propaganda as well. And, it became sort of a tug-of-war match in where the opposers of Khilafat kept trying to bring the people away from the true Khilafat. However, as this Khilafat was divinely inspired and was, the decree of God, the Almighty Himself, it was to be victorious. And in this way, people began showing a positive response towards the Khilafat of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu. And in this way, a majority of the community accepted his Khilafat. And in this way, a majority of the community came under the banner and under the flag of the true Khilafat appointed by God the Almighty Himself.
Along with the personal reassurance that Allah Ta'ala Himself granted Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II radiallahu anhu in the form of the aforementioned dream, there were various signs that descended from the heavens that reassured the hearts of the populace, those who pledged allegiance to Khilafat. And this has always been the way of God, that as the promised Messiah ﷺ, so rightly points out in the Victory of Islam, he says that when Allah Ta'ala is about to appoint someone in the heavens, at that time thousands of angels descend to the earth with the sole purpose of turning the hearts and causing them to become perpetually inclined toward that grand personage who Allah Ta'ala appoints as His representative in the earth.
And as you've just mentioned, this is the sunnat of Allah Ta'ala, the practice of God, that upon the appointment of every person, every Khalifa, every Prophet, these angels descend and turn the hearts towards this appointed one. And so we see in the time of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Anhu, according to Tarikh Ahmadiyyat, by mid-1914, about 300 of these dreams and visions had been collected. And some examples that we see that are mentioned in the history of the Jamaat are that, firstly, the Jamaat of Shah Jahanpur sent their letters of allegiance as soon as they had received the knowledge of the passing of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Awwal Raziyallahu Anhu. And it was divine intervention, it was a divine design that these hearts were being turned towards Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Anhu. Because the same example is replicated in the Jamaat of Delhi, where upon the news of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal Raziyallahu Anhu's passing, their hearts are turned towards Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Raziyallahu Anhu, and they send their letters of allegiance right away and unanimously. Another really interesting incident of this time is that of Hazrat Sarfullah Khan Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu and how he sent his letter of allegiance. He writes that he was staying in England at the time, and Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib was also staying in England. And at one point they were staying in the same house. And so Zafrullah Khan Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu and Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib would have discussions regarding Khilafat. And Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib many a time would attempt to turn the attention of Zafrullah Khan Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu away from this idea of Khilafat that was appointed by Allah Ta'ala, the Khilafat of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal Raziyallahu Anhu, and then what followed Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Anhu. But what's really interesting is that Sir Zafrullah Khan Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu writes that it was these discussions which turned his attention, which turned his heart towards this idea of Khilafat that was appointed by Allah Ta'ala, which was fulfilled in the person of Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Raziyallahu Anhu.
That Chaudhary Sahib Radiyallahu Anhu, he has demonstrated that when a person is sincere in his bath, no matter how much he is tested or put to trial, he remains strong, is testament to what the promised Messiah ﷺ has written time and time again. The promised Messiah ﷺ has written that that individual who is sincere in his bath, when he is tested, he only continues to climb the loftiest horizons and get stronger and stronger in his sincerity. But that individual who is insincere or is weak in his bath, when he is tested, he starts to decline spiritually and in his iman and his faith. As such, it was very, very pertinent that at this time, the faith of the believers around the world was being strengthened and fortified, because this man, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Radiyallahu Anhu, and this was most pertinent, that all souls around the world of the believing people were to be turned toward this individual, because this was a man, a Khalifa, Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Radiyallahu Anhu, who was about to change the course of human history forever.
And those people who did not initially pledge allegiance at the hand of Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, or the opponents of Khilafat, had actually began their ideology of the fact that the Anjuman was the true Khilafat during the time of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu. And they always wanted to push this agenda and this propaganda that they had. And they always tried this, and when they saw that the Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu had passed away, they thought that this was the greatest opportunity they had to solidify this stance and to establish the Anjuman as the so-called true Khilafat. Now, what they did was that around the time of the election of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, they decided to appoint their own Khilafat or establish their own Khilafat, in which they took 3 high-ranking officials from within the Anjuman and said that these were the representatives of the true Khilafat. And these were namely Maulvi Ghulam Hasan Khan Sahib, Peshawari, Sayyid Hamid Shah Sahib, Sialkoti, and Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib. So now these were the attempts of the opponents of Khilafat. And little did they realize that God the Almighty had established the true Khilafat himself, and hence he himself would take care of it and protect it and defend it. So by establishing their own so-called Khilafat, what the opponents of Khilafat had done was set up a test to see which was the true Khilafat, that of Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, which he had been appointed for, or the Anjuman, which they thought was the true Khilafat. So what happened was that the first two people mentioned, namely Maulvi Ghulam Hassan Khan Sahib and Sayyid Hamid Shah Sahib, they eventually realized their ways and saw that the true Khilafat was that which Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu was representing. So they ended up pledging allegiance at his hand. Now, as for Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib, well, he continued in his ways and kept associating himself with the Lahori faction. However, after some time, he ended up moving to London, and although he still, by name was part of the Lahori faction, he ended up distancing himself and wasn't as involved as he was before with this community. And what solidifies this is the fact that he had a lot of disagreements with Maulvi Muhammad Ali Sahib, who was another great proponent in establishing the Lahori community. And he would argue with him and have various debates with him regarding the ways in which they propagated their message and various matters such as this. So in this way, he had sort of a falling out with the Lahori faction. Now, during the end, near the end of Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib's life, he saw a dream in which he was standing in a courtroom and he was the defendant and he was standing alongside Maulvi Muhammad Ali Sahib. He says that as I was standing there, I felt as if God the Almighty is about to pass down a verdict for me. He then sees the promised Messiah ﷺ stand up and in a very powerful voice deliver a verdict in which God the Almighty essentially told Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib that he had been wrong in his ways of opposing Khilafat all along. So in this way, we see that God the Almighty himself, having established the Khilafat himself, protected it and made sure that it was defended at all costs, and hence the opponents of Khilafat had to suffer defeat.
Now just to reiterate, when the bath was taken at the hands of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Anhu, approximately 2,000 members of the community had committed to this allegiance, but 50 had refused. Now this group of people is known as the Ghair Mubayin, or in other words, those people who had not taken the oath of allegiance at the hands of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Anhu. Now we see that in early 1914, this group of people was busy in spreading propaganda against the Jamaat and Khilafat. They stated that it was only 40 people who had taken the oath of allegiance at the hands of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Raziyallahu Anhu, and the remaining thousands of people rejected Khilafat. They also firmly believed that because they were in the majority, they were on the right. But we see that very quickly their majority was changed into the minority. It is also very interesting to note that newspapers at that time stated that the faction of Khwaja Kamaluddin Sahib has been outshined and defeated by the faction of Hazrat Sahibzada Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Sahib Raziyallahu Anhu. But the greatest consequence of rejecting Khilafat for the Ghair Mubayin was that they changed and tampered their very core beliefs. For example, they stated that they were members of a Prophet's community, but later on they degraded the status of the promised Messiah ﷺ, stating that he was only a scholarly person and someone who received revelation from Allah Almighty. Initially, they believed that Qadian was a holy site and they promised never to cut their ties with it. But we see that later on they moved to Lahore and they deemed Qadian as not a blessed site anymore. We also see that they deemed the family of the promised Messiah ﷺ as holy people and pious people initially. But again, we see that later on they called them, God forbid, people who have gone astray. We see that this group of people, by rejecting Khilafat, they also rejected the true teachings of the promised Messiah ﷺ, and in a sense, they brought defeat to themselves.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Ahmadiyyat, Roots to Branches. The purpose of today's episode was to see the fulfillment of God's promise of establishing Khilafat on this earth, yet again, in the form of the second Khalifa, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, there is a famous saying which goes, history repeats itself. Hence, it was no surprise that upon the establishment of the second Khilafat, there was a great deal of opposition. However, history also bears testament to the fact that those men chosen and selected by God the Almighty Himself are always victorious, and their opponents always face defeat. Hence, in this way, the opponents of Khilafat had to face defeat, and their ideologies faltered at every step. So with that, Jazakumullah for watching. Until next time, when by the grace of God, Ahmadiyyat will have branched out even further. Assalamu alaikum.
हर चार सू है शोहरा हुआ कादियान का, हर चार सू है शोहरा हुआ कादियान का, मस्कन है जो के महदिए आखिर ज़मान का, मस्कन है जो के महदिए आखिर